Thank you for joining us for this Denver 7 Town Hall. I'm Ann Trujillo. Coronavirus has changed life as we know it, and we know you have questions about your rights. So tonight we're taking a look at some of the legal questions that are coming up as Colorado moves forward with this rebound. Joining us this evening to answer some of the questions you have sent to Contact 7, Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser and Tyler Jekyll, the Director of Policy and Research at the Bell Policy Center, which works with policymakers and community advocates to advance economic mobility for Coloradans. All right, gentlemen, thank you first and foremost for being here. And let's talk first about people defying orders. We know that restaurants are opening up, saying they're hurting. So how do you respond to that?
And let me first put this flip side. The number of people who are following the guidance and directions at great sacrifice, it's inspiring to me, because the spirit, do your part, Colorado, we're in this together, that's the spirit. And what you have noted is there are some exceptions for different reasons. We've seen a lot of times when you talk to people and you explain, people change their behavior. And this is a new thing for all of us. The idea of a pandemic was not on our minds, and we as a state have pivoted and in general have shown great resilience.
And Tyler, you have said you're hearing from a lot of businesses that are struggling. So I mean, and really that's what these businesses are saying. So how do you respond to what they're doing in this civil disobedience to some degree, I guess?
Well, I guess there's two parts to it. I mean, I just want to say, I mean, businesses are struggling, and having started my career in the restaurant business, I know how thin the margins are there and how tough it is now, and working with small businesses now to try and access a lot of the programs that are available, there's a lot of difficulties. But I think we're kind of faced with a fundamental question of how do we protect our communities and how do we rebuild our economy? Because opening up too soon puts our workers at risk, it puts our communities at risk, and potentially it puts our greater economic recovery at greater risk as well. So I mean, these public orders, while very difficult when it comes to the business side, are really important to ensuring that we come out of this pandemic both healthy and strong.
Because we're also hearing about people refusing to wear masks. Do people have the right to refuse wearing them? And then on the flip side, do businesses have the right to refuse these customers who refuse to follow their rules?
The way I would frame this, Ann, is that we all have to recognize not wearing a mask is a public health risk. We've seen this: no shirts, no shoes, no service.
Right.
People concerned about bringing in germs into a restaurant. That's something we got used to. It's hard to get used to the idea that if I want to go to a restaurant, I need to be wearing a mask. But the same principle applies. If you're not wearing a mask, you have the threat to get infected or to infect others.
So as a business practice, go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think it's a conversation we need to continually have. I mean, there's lots of communities where wearing a mask has different implications. Sometimes if you're from a community that's had many interactions with the police for wearing masks, it's not going to be as easy. But with that being said, I mean, we're definitely trying to institute practices here that are really trying to protect both ourselves and the communities we live in. So we can kind of have policy debates about kind of how we need to actually have these different requirements and for how long. But I do think when it comes to really being able to fight this collectively, we need to really come together around that.
Now, you both have said to me in a previous conversation that, I mean, we know that Coloradans are struggling, and you're getting those calls in your offices, complaints, concerns about people accessing benefits. What are you telling people? What advice do you have?
And let me give people three categories of advice. First, and this is super important, please don't be afraid to ask for grace. What a lot of people need to know, if you have a student loan, for example, chances are if you need a break in terms of basically forbearance without any harm to yourself, you're going to get it. You need to know to ask for it. Other financial institutions have the same policies, which is if you need to get help, you have to ask for it. That's the first point to know. The second point to know is as things are changing, airline fares, hotel fares, you can and should ask what sort of accommodations are available, because we are all rolling with this. And what I've found is a remarkable number of businesses being very responsible, taking the high road, and that's super important. And the final thing is a lot of people are being afraid about being conned or cheated out there because there are rising scams during this time too. And so I would tell people, be vigilant, be careful. It is dangerous, not just getting the virus, but also dangerous in terms of different scams that people can fall prey to.
Tyler?
I would just say, I mean, a lot of our policies are changing or getting defined almost on a daily basis. So I think making sure that, to Phil's point, you are asking and you're documenting it, because things may change, and being able to demonstrate that you did ask for something could go a very long way. I will say, especially when it comes to people returning to work, I would definitely really visit, especially the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment's website, because they offer quite a bit of guidance on what can be done, and whether or not you're not feeling safe actually returning to work, whether or not you can maintain benefits, or whether or not you have other options available to you. And I think really asking organizations in the community who are really diving into this as well to really help know what your rights are and know where other services are as well.
And let me ask you both, do businesses have a requirement to provide masks for their employees? Do they have to do that? Phil Weiser, I'll ask you that.
It's a really important point, and I want to generalize a little bit and let Tyler take up some specifics. Businesses absolutely have a responsibility to their employees to make sure they're working in a safe environment. One of the challenges is getting enough, we've heard this phrase now a lot, PPE out there, mask being the most notable, but also we've heard people talk about social spacing. Are people far enough apart? And I will tell you, at the Department of Law, as we call the Attorney General's office, we have 500 plus employees. And when we think about people going back to the office, we are thinking very hard and long, how do we make sure the conditions are safe, whether it's giving people masks who need them, making sure people are apart from one another, making sure it's easy to wash hands and get hand sanitizer. This is our new world. All employers have to embrace this.
Tyler?
Yes, I mean, I think especially for people who are currently on unemployment and their employers are opening up again, people have to make sure they're going back to a safe environment. And especially if you are a vulnerable individual, which especially through some of the executive orders are individuals with pre-existing conditions or older Coloradans, you really can't be forced to go back to work unless there are adequate safety measures. So it really is a gentle balance, but I think, yes, businesses have to comply with both state regulations as well as the federal regulations as well.
And on the other side, what's an employer's liability if one of their employees happens to come down with coronavirus?
And it's going to depend on the situation. What we all need to know is there will be people who will continue to get the virus. And as long as everyone's taken sound precautions, that's going to be a fact that can still happen. What's not okay is employers refusing to take precautions, putting employees in an unsafe situation, and allowing them to get sick as a result of that. And that's the line that employers have to constantly be asking themselves. What measures are necessary to protect people, both customers and employees? And one of the things that's going to come through this time, those playing the long game, whether it's employers or businesses, who treat people both safely, responsibly, kindly, they are and should get rewarded for that. And those who are going to play games, cut corners, take risks with people's lives, they should be held accountable for that. And that's something that will happen not just from a legal perspective, but also from a social norm perspective. And this is something that, again, most people I see rising to this challenge, getting how important it is that we're in this together, protecting each other.
Okay, so who holds them accountable? Who do you call if you feel like your employee isn't taking the proper procedures?
Tyler, you want to start this one?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple different approaches you can take. Definitely when it comes to whether or not a business is following safety precautions, it is both your local public health department. So if it's in Denver, it could be your Denver Public Health Department, as well as our regional office of OSHA, which does a lot of worker safety. Also, I think you can, especially if you're maintaining unemployment insurance or want to deal with that, the Colorado Department of Employment and Labor is another area where you can go as well.
Okay.
And then I guess the last point I would just say is if you're feeling you're discriminated against because you're a vulnerable worker and are not going back to work, also the state's Office of Civil Rights is another place where you can go.
All right, good information. Okay, we had a question about jury duty. This came from Wayne, and he tells us he requested to be excused from jury duty early in the pandemic because he's 67 and at risk for the virus, and he writes, I'm still at risk and do not feel safe having to report for jury duty in September since there is no vaccine or cure at this time. What should I do? I'd rather be alive and safe at home versus fulfilling my public duty and ending up dead.
Wayne asks a very important question, Ann, and what I would say first off is our court system has suspended all jury trials until early July. At that point, assuming we come back and have jury trials, I believe we're going to see appropriate measures taken to protect the public health. And this is part of our challenge right now, which is how do we make sure to know that we're not putting people in harm's way, and how do we make accommodations for people who need it? This is going to be a big conversation. There are people who are especially at risk. We have to make sure we're being smart about how we protect them. This obviously ties into other contexts too, like nursing homes, for example. What we all need to do is continue asking these questions and looking to develop solutions. We are absolutely in new territory here.
Yeah, things change, and that is a fact. And Tyler, we know one of the things the Bell Policy Center has focused on over the years is reforming TABOR, Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So we know revenue is down in Colorado, which will likely mean a sizable budget shortfall. What areas should we expect to see the hardest hit as we move forward, particularly as it concerns employees in Colorado?
Yeah, well, I first want to say is it's not too late for us to act. I mean, there are provisions within TABOR itself that allow for an emergency tax to actually allow for more revenue. And there's a proposal on the ballot to actually have a progressive tax that can raise revenue. So we don't have to, as a state, make these cuts. But these cuts are going to be extremely severe. By some estimates, they could be as large as $3 to $4 billion, which for a general fund budget of around 13 billion, that is not small cuts.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of areas to cut as well without making really deep cuts to fundamental services that we all rely upon. So just to give you that sense, education, higher education, health, and human services are really the four major parts of our budget. And education is likely to be one of the biggest areas that may be cut if we have to make these severe cuts. So coming out of our last recession, where as a state, we actually were underfunding education by upwards of over $500 million, having to do upwards of another maybe close to $1 billion in cuts to our education system puts our opportunities for our children at great risk. But I really want to emphasize, we have choices to still make. The federal government can really step in and really help. And that's continuing to be debated at the federal level. And then we as a state can continue to make action too. So we don't have to sacrifice our future opportunities right now.
All right, we had a person call into our tip line with a question about her family doctor's possible exposure to COVID-19. Take a listen.
I was just wondering if our family PCP has to legally tell us yes or no that he's been exposed or had the virus, because he canceled our appointments and then rescheduled them for like a month out. And so I was just wondering about that.
I'll let you two choose. Who gets to answer that?
I'm happy to start with it. I would be surprised that the family PCP didn't answer that question directly. The point here, and this ties into a larger theme, you'll hear this phrase more and more, called contact tracing, which basically means who have you been in contact with? We actually had this in our office early on. A few people were believed to have the virus. Those people did something extraordinary. They reached out to anyone they were in contact with and said, just so you know, I might have exposed you, allowing people to either self-quarantine, get tested, or both. I would be shocked if a doctor didn't immediately say, yes, that's why. there might be lots of benign reasons. This question also gives another point that's worth underscoring. Telehealth has taken huge strides during this challenge. And as a norm, I think you'll start seeing more and more people say, if we can do this through telehealth, let's do this so as to keep people as protected as possible.
Sure. Start doing things a little differently. We also heard from several business owners, including Rebecca, who's a self-employed psychologist. She expressed frustration about how hard it's been to find masks, gloves, wipes, and so forth. So, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. Rebecca wants to know, how am I supposed to reopen my business and keep my patients and myself safe if the PPE I'm mandated to use by virtue of the public health order simply isn't available?
I'm happy to give a very simple answer, which is people have been making their own masks. There's no magic here. You'll see lots of options online. There are lots of people starting to sell masks. So I think masks are available. Testing, however, still remains a challenge. And I will say one of the more painful lessons from this crisis, and we're going to have a lot of them, is that we weren't more ready and able to scale up and have testing capacity. The mask capacity, most people I know are finding ways, whether it's a bandana or something else. It doesn't have to be that sophisticated. It plays a valuable role, just having something to block your airways, and that might just be a bandana.
Personal responsibility. All right, another question, this one from parents concerned about summer camps, not just whether they'll be canceled, but what they can do if they don't feel safe sending their children. So what, if any, legal protection do parents have to cancel plans and seek a refund? Many places say they won't issue refunds unless the camp itself is canceled. And what if a place says, I mean, I know, Phil Weiser, you said go ahead and ask anyway, but what if places say that it's non-refundable?
The challenge here is, what were the terms up front? If someone paid a non-refundable deposit, usually that means as long as the service is still available. If the service won't be available at all, and you couldn't go to the camp even if you wanted to, then keeping money does seem questionable, and I would be interested to hear if there's camps to do that. The more likely scenario is the one that you just mentioned, which is what happens if you don't want to go because you think it's not safe, but they're saying we're giving you the access to the camp. That's a more delicate issue, and generally speaking, it's going to be hard for you to ask for your money back where it's still available, but you just might have a different level of risk tolerance. And that's going to be something we're going to see again and again as people are going to be asking, will I go to X, whatever it might be, in this new environment? Tyler, what are you telling people about that?
So that actually hasn't come up for us, but I do think it raises another issue that we really have been seeing, is a lot of people who currently have lost their jobs and have gone unemployment, but are dealing with the problem of schools are closed and a lot of these summer programs are closed. So how do I actually go back to employment without proper childcare? And I just want to offer a couple things that are out there, and that is that federally there was passed paid family and medical leave, which includes if you can't go back to work because of childcare up to at least 2 weeks. And so I would offer that as something that people who are probably having to be in that horrible situation of, look, my job is opening up, but I don't have adequate childcare. Here are some ways to actually at least help out for a little bit of time while hopefully they can figure out longer term options.
All right, gentlemen, someone just Facebooked us saying if our employer is asking us to sign a waiver stating that if we get infected with COVID-19, we won't sue them in order to return to work, what should we do in this case?
Tyler, what do you advise people in that situation?
We don't do, we're a policy organization, so I'm unfortunately not, we don't provide legal advice. I mean, I do think that is especially possibly creating a unsafe work environment by requiring a waiver. And so I would actually be either contacting Department of Labor and Employment around it to see what your rights might be. But it does seem like it's possibly putting people at a higher risk and jeopardizing their health.
Okay, let's move on. Jana lives in an apartment complex and writes, doesn't Governor Polis's order require my landlord to inform us whether our property is covered by the federal eviction freeze. The landlord just gave us a paper with the federal statute, what can be done to make sure that landlords comply and give us the information we need. Phil?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here.
Okay,
I mean,
Tyler?
so the executive order does mandate that. So, I mean, I think the first step would just be making sure to send a letter to your landlord asking the direct question of, are we a federally subsidized property? Otherwise, if there's no follow-up, I think you can both reach out to your local Department of Housing. So if you're in the city of Denver, that would be the Division of Housing at the city, or the State Department of Local Affairs, their Division of Housing. But I even say even further than that, a local organization that's part of a national network called Enterprise Community Partners has actually created a list that you can access online that actually documents all of the federally subsidized properties in Colorado. So if the question is our property actually one that has received federal subsidy, you can actually see that on that list.
Right.
And that has huge, I'll just say it has big implications because the moratorium for federal properties goes until July 31st, whereas the current one that the governor passed right now goes to May 30th.
Okay, so on the other side of that issue, Helena, who's a landlord, says, I have renters who feel like they've been given a free pass on paying rent, and I want to know what I can do legally since evictions are not being enforced.
Let me start with, this is a very important point. The grace that is being offered vis-a-vis evictions is not a free pass to not pay rent. Those of us who can afford to pay rent or pay our student loans, obligation to keep doing so. And in fact, if we try to take advantage of whatever grace is there, we are undermining the people who need it. And so what I would first say to Helena is ask the individual, do you really need this grace? Because you're not going to get out of having to pay it. You still owe it, but the grace means you don't have to pay it right now. And I do think, again, I've seen mostly responsible behavior. I don't see people abusing these grace periods. If you're the landlord, I do believe that's your first line of discussion. Ultimately, there will be an opportunity, if necessary, to use evictions. But the goal is right now, we don't want people in the midst of this crisis when they're hurting most to have to lose their apartment.
Okay, so staying with that topic of evictions, we have a question from someone concerned about some friends who have a storage unit. They want to know if the moratorium on evictions applies to those units as well. So listen to this.
I have some friends who unfortunately are homeless and have been for about the past year and a half, and they're genuinely struggling, but they also maintain a storage unit where they're trying to preserve the few things they have to set up a house with if they're able to get, back into a house situation, which they'd like to do but can't. And anyway, they're very, very concerned because normally they just kind of scratch the dirt for coming up with the money for the storage unit, and they're very fearful that if they can't come up with it because times have changed, that they're going to lose their storage unit and lose what few goods they still have.
Phil, I'll let you take that.
What a heartbreaking tale. And I would hope whoever owns that storage unit provides, again, the sort of grace that we need. As a formal matter, Tyler, you've studied this more closely than I. Is eviction protection governing storage units as well?
I actually am not positive. I mean, the eviction order does cover a lot of the writs that may apply to similar evictions of storage units, but I actually am not positive. So I'm sorry, I can't provide more advice there.
No, it's an important issue that that will take some digging. In the meantime, is either of you seeing any talk of worker protection, say on debt collection or wage garnishment? Tyler?
Yes, and we've been working very hard to see if there's things that can be done through executive order around wage garnishment, or if there is more things we can do legislatively when the session comes back in order, because it's a critical issue to make sure that people are not seeing a lot of their wages or even some of the stimulus checks that are coming in be garnished at the time that they need it most and are able to recover. So it's been something that we're continuing to really look at all angles of how we can really engage around that right now. And I know the Attorney General is working on quite a bit of areas to do that as well. So I'll let you go over that as well.
Thank you, Tyler. This is really important to our office. We oversee a number of debt collectors I mentioned earlier, student loans are really big on our list. We worked with a number of private student loan entities to provide more grace, giving people till August 30th as they work through the current challenges. There's also federal action to provide a similar grace period for federal backed student loans. Other lenders were asking the same sort of mindset. We are, again, encouraging people to ask their lenders for this sort of grace. If you are able to do so, obviously we say pay the debts you have, but if you're not, please don't be afraid to ask for help.
Gentlemen, we have about 3 minutes left, so I just want to make sure that we cover some territory. I know, Phil Weiser, you were talking about scams that are becoming more and more frequent out there. What did you want to let people know about those scams?
What really pains me is that during this time when so many people are afraid, we've talked about all the fears people have, scammers will come out, prey on those fears, whether it's by robocalls, text, social media, even sometimes door to door. They'll let you know, we'll help you get a stimulus check, or we'll help give you a cure to the coronavirus. And all they're doing is trying to get your money. So my message is simple. Be vigilant, be careful, stick to reputable sources, whether it's your doctor or calling the IRS directly. Don't get suckered into giving away information that you're going to regret sharing because it's going to hurt you later.
And I think part of this has come up because so many people have had frustrations with accessing benefits. So does either one of you want to offer some suggestions on how to better access benefits? Is there something we don't know out there that people should know?
I would say, I mean, I think especially when trying to access unemployment insurance and a lot of those direct benefits is continue to be persistent. And I know that's hard to say if you've been going through it many times over, but a lot of the benefit systems around, especially the federal dollars, are just starting to be implemented. And I know the Department of Labor is really continuing to move forward on it. I'd also really emphasize a couple other big resources out there, which is 211, which is run by the Mile High United Way, which can really help access different types of benefits across the board. And then also the Colorado Peak website. It's Peak like as in a mountain. That's another resource that'll really allows you to see what you may be eligible and actually make applications for many different resources.
And anything else along the lines of worker safety as we start to see people going back to work?
Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Part of the message I think both Tyler and I have left is, I learned this actually from my mom. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you see something that concerns you, please ask your supervisor at work. If you see someone who potentially is being taken advantage of, please ask the person if they need help. By asking more questions, by being more careful, we potentially can save lives, help each other get through this.
And Tyler?
I would just say there's a lot of organizations that are out there that want to answer your questions and be helpful. Colorado Legal Services was one of them. Towards Justice is another organization, and especially around housing, there is a COVID-19 eviction defense project. So I think really trying to find those community partners that will really help you understand a lot of the complicated system that's being developed.
Thank you, gentlemen. Tyler Jekyll, Phil Weiser, thank you so much for your insight.